Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson and I am Community Engagement Coordinator at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight we are delighted to bring you holiday photos from lights to loved ones. Photographer Jim Frazier will help you take great shots of people, providing tips for candids, portraits, and group photos. We will learn more effective lighting options, and he will also explain how to take gorgeous pictures of holiday decorations. Jim Frazier is a retired professional speaker and trainer on tax issues. Currently, Jim is a volunteer photographer at Cantigny, facilitates photography groups, teaches classes, and is an active member of the Elgin Area Camera Club. His photographic work has been seen in many publications and a wide variety of advertising, signage, calendars, presentations, websites, and blogs. His prints hang in collections all over the country. So with so much expertise and wonderful information and insights to provide, I'm anxious to turn the mic and screen over to you, Jim. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Barry. And good evening to all of you. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is contact information about me. I'd welcome any questions from anybody about pictures or questions you have after tonight. If you want to see all of my pictures, or virtually all of my pictures, those that I'm willing to share with people, the link to my Flickr account is shown. I only post some current pictures as well as some of the best or my favorite pictures on Facebook and Instagram and my blog. So, so that's just a way of getting a hold of me. But the most important thing is feel free to email me with any questions. We're going to be covering, what we're going to be covering tonight is mostly applicable for pretty much any camera you have, from a smartphone up to a professional level camera. However, there are some things that I'm going to be talking about tonight that just don't work real well on cell phones and point and shoot cameras, although I've got a few fixes for that. But the cell phone cameras might have some issues, and so I'll try to talk about those as we go. We will also talk a little bit about post-processing, editing pictures after the fact, which you can ignore, choose to ignore if you don't do that or don't want to do that, and that's fine. That's half the fun for me, is actually processing the pictures after the fact. And maybe there'll be some new equipment you may wish to ask Santa for, but if you do get a new camera, please don't try to figure it out on Christmas Day. You're going to be busy and nobody wants to watch you trying to figure out what's going on with the buttons and so forth on Christmas Day. So try to get Santa to give it to you a few days early. I had a friend once who literally opened the box for her camera on the plane flying to Cancun. And she showed me the pictures later and it was disappointing. What we'll be talking about is all different kinds of light that are going to help you take pictures. We'll talk about people and we'll talk about lights and decorations and so forth as well. And if we have time, I'll talk about model trains. They do fit into the Christmas theme and I kind of like to photograph them. And there's a really cool technique if you've tried in the past to photograph them and been disappointed. What are the sources of light that are available to you? First of all, there's outside. Our good old friend, the sun. There are sunny days and then there are cloudy days and so forth, but generally speaking, outside solves one major problem for you, and that is that there's an abundance of light. But if you go inside, now you don't have as much light anymore. And so we need to deal with that. Try to basically deal with whatever light you have inside. We'll talk about a special situation, which is window light. And then we'll talk about flashes and alternative lights, shall we say. We'll talk about what's built into your camera, whether it's a pop-up flash or an LED on your cell phone. And we'll also talk about lights that you can have separate from your camera. Again, flashes and LED panels. And so let's talk about outside. If you're photographing people outside, it sometimes can be a problem, particularly in the winter, because there's snow on the ground. And snow Or shall we just say more generically, a bright background can be a challenge. For example, this is a photo that I took of some friends in Rocky Mountain National Park in many years ago. And you'll notice that we have what's called a concrete sky. Concrete skies are basically cloudy, overcast skies that are really bright. Cloudy, overcast skies are really bright as far as your camera's figuring out what exposure to set. And because of that, it tends to underexpose. It's reading the sky and saying, oh, I got to expose for the sky. But then those dark faces on the people in front of you, camera, get underexposed. And so I can fix this, and I did, by just overexposing the photographed image. But this is the same thing that's going to happen if you use a camera to overexpose, is if you overexpose the background, then you're going to, or if you're going to overexpose for the people's faces, you're going to overexpose for the background. Not much you can do about that. Usually this isn't a problem on sunny, blue sky kinds of days. The blue doesn't really cause a problem, but those white skies tend to be a problem. So, but it's also a problem with snow. Now, took this photograph. Now, by the way, I would apologize. A lot of the pictures that you will see are of me, only because I'm a really good model and I follow instructions to the letter. And so for that reason, you'll see a lot of me, and I apologize in advance if your brain gets burned with my face by the end of the program. But in any case, the club I belonged to at the time had a contest, and the theme was quotations from The Princess Bride. And so I decided on unemployed in Greenland. Let you figure out if that's worthy of laughing or not. Now, the problem, of course, is all this snow behind me, all right, is causing the camera to say, ooh, this is a really bright scene, so I need to make everything dark. And it made my face dark. It made my jacket, which I don't really care about dark, but it made my face dark. And so one way is simply overexposing when you're taking the picture. If you know you're shooting against snow or a concrete sky or a beach scene, overexpose. And in this case, I overexposed, but I lost the snow. And since the point of the picture was Greenland, I wanted the snow to show. So basically, by doing a little post-processing and essentially only overexposing my face, I was able to get a much more, now it's not a great picture, but it illustrates the point I'm talking about. Many cameras have what are called scene modes, and where you can set your camera for certain types of situations. One of those is beach mode. I don't know if there's a snow mode. Yeah, there's a snow mode as well. And what that mode basically does is set it up so that it's overexposing. That's all it's really doing, is overexposing the shot. Now, when you're talking about outside decorations, obviously they're probably going to be at night. Now, when it's at night, even with the fact that you're photographing lights, you're going to be dealing with either slow shutter speeds, which means you may need a tripod, or really high ISO. ISO is a term that is for regarding the sensitivity of the sensor, the chip inside the camera that takes the picture. And when the ISO is really high, you get a lot more grain or noise. In the digital world, we call it noise. And so you want to try to avoid that if you can. But if you're taking pictures at night, even if it's of lights, you're going to get some noise, unless you've got it on a tripod, and then you can finagle things if you've got a camera that you have some control over. You also have to remember to balance your surroundings with the lights, so that the lights have some context and you're not just photographing lights in the dark, basically. The auto setting on your camera may not help, although I have a picture that I will show you that I took with a cell phone camera. It came out pretty good. Now, this one I took on a tripod with a good camera, and this is the Christmas tree in Geneva. Unfortunately, they've cut this tree down because it was getting old, and the new tree, but this was a beautiful tree. But you'll notice it's got context. It's got the courthouse in the background. It's got the square, some statues and so forth. So this is the kind of to me, a perfect Christmas decoration shot. Remember, you need to think in terms of not only photographing the lights, but photographing the surrounding structures and things to get a little context. This is a church that I belong to in Geneva. Since I'm a member of this church and at the time I was in a leadership position, I had the code to get into the building. And so I went in, this is on a weeknight, nothing was going on, with some friends, and I turned all the lights on that made sense. So we had these nice stained light coming through the stained glass windows, and I got the decorations turned on. So it turned out pretty nice. But again, just the decorations aren't what you're after. You're after context. And in the case of a church, light coming from the stained glass windows as well. Now this one, not as much context. This is illuminations at Morton Arboretum back in, I think, 2014. Now there's not much context here. The reason I like this picture and chose it is that it shows the reflections in, I forgot the name of the main lake at Morton Arboretum, but in any case, it shows the reflections. I thought that was kind of nice. But as you can see, the visitor center is really not much there. If I was going to balance it a little bit more, I'd try to bring out a little bit more in the visitor center, but these reflections are pretty cool. Now, last year, I don't know if they did it this year or not, but last year, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway had a Christmas lights program. They actually done it for a couple of years, but we were able to go this last year. Now, we didn't have an opportunity to use tripods because this was a situation where you drove around the interior of the track and even on the main straightaway. It was very cool. And this was a picture I took with, currently have a really good top of the line camera, and noise wasn't really a problem. However, I happened to be using my cell phone as well, and this was taken with the cell phone. This is on the main straightaway. This is the pagoda, if you're familiar with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But you'll notice, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there is a little noise in the wall here. And so my cell phone is 4 years old and it's been superseded by even better technology, but the 4-year-old camera still didn't do too bad. Little noise, most people are willing to accept because they are more interested in the picture, and the technical aspects they may or may not care about. Now, when you get to interiors, there's just usually not enough light. You're going to either have underexposed pictures or you're going to have noise from getting the picture to the point where it's looking like it's a good picture. So turn on as many lights as you can, even if you don't normally use them or if you don't like them. The chandelier in our dining room, for example, isn't really it throws a lot of light, but it's really only nice if you're sitting at the table. But if we've got something going on, I'm going to turn on the chandelier. I'm going to turn on every light in the house just to throw as much light as I can in the situation. Decorations can provide some light as well. And then there are supplemental tools, which we'll talk about. This was taken with a really old camera. This was taken maybe 15 years ago. And this was the original picture. This was where I post-processed it and brightened it. As you can see, it got noisy and so forth. This is that noise that I keep talking about. When you're shooting in the dark at high, and particularly at the highest ISO you can shoot at, you're going to get some noise, and it's particularly visible in this picture. On the other hand, sometimes there's enough available light to get a nice picture, and it's balanced nicely with the Christmas tree. This is my wife, and she didn't model for me on this for the pictures I took for this program. So you're not going to see a lot of pictures of Kate today. But in any case, this particular room that we put the tree in is pretty well lit. There's a lot of canister lights in the ceiling, plus a lot of other lights. So we can make the room pretty bright. And so I had her pose next to the tree. And again, this is something you want to be aware of, is you got to balance your lighting so that the decorations don't get lost in terms of the light that you're using to illuminate the tree and so forth. So this one worked out. This is another event that I photographed, and it was inside. I didn't use any flashes. We had enough light to be able to take decent pictures. So sometimes you can get to the situation where you've got enough light. This room had a lot of windows, plus it had a lot of artificial light. And my camera can handle pretty high ISOs. And so this picture came out very well. I took tons of pictures that day. And so these kids, it's a model railroad display that the club that I belong to puts on once a year at the facility or the development that I live at. And as you may have guessed, I'm kind of into trains. This is a Christmas tree ornament that is lit only by the lights on the Christmas tree and the light in the room. And so you can take pictures with just available light. You don't have to go out and buy stuff, but recognize that you may be making some sacrifices in terms of quality because you may wind up with some noise. But shooting with available light is certainly very, very desirable. It looks much more natural. You don't have to buy equipment and so forth. Although frankly, I like to buy equipment, so it works out. This is another picture of the Christmas tree. Again, most of the lighting here is coming from the decorations themselves, as well as the ambient light in the room. This one is a 20-second exposure. I forgot exactly why I did this, but it's a nice picture of an ornament. It also shows that I was using a tripod, as you can see me reflected in the image of the ornament. But again, lighting was coming from the room as well as the tree. The tree itself is nice and dark, so it's contrasting nicely with the red of the ornament. So when you're photographing the tree, try to use a little ambient light, existing light in your house, but try to use a tripod if you have one, and try to use the light from the tree as part of your illumination. Speaking of things to photograph the cookies, all right? Do not stint on photographing the cookies. Now, you will, of course, eat the cookies after you have photographed them, but photograph the cookies. Now, somebody in your family, maybe you may be your spousal unit, but somebody has set the table. They're very proud of the table. Photograph it. For family happiness, photograph it. This is a bad photograph. I'm going to show you another photograph in a second, but this is a bad photograph. The horizon isn't straight. The window was washed out. And even though the window was washed out, it still didn't really illuminate the table enough to really make a nice picture. But when you close in on a detail, sometimes you can turn a picture into a really nice one. And this was, my wife brings out the Waterford crystal once a year on Christmas time, along with the good china. And this was that day, and along with my mother's Christmas tablecloth, I think. And so this was a picture that I like a lot. So take pictures of the table. Now, this is a picture of my wife. This illustrates window light. I've got some other illustrations of window light later on, but this illustrates window light. It's a very, very nice light to use, particularly for photographing people. Usually, unless you happen to have the sun streaming in through that window, it's indirect, very soft light. And we were having coffee in a little cafe in Door County, and we were chatting. And I suddenly realized that the light was really, really nice. And so she endured posing for me, and I got one of my favorite pictures of Kate. Now let's talk about supplemental light. This is where you're going to have to spend some money, folks, unless you've already got the light. Now, built into your camera or your phone is a pop-up flash or an LED if you've got a phone. As you're going to see in a minute, don't use it unless you absolutely have to, because that light is terrible, okay? One of the problems with flash light, and it requires diagrams to explain it, but the light from a flash tends to fall off very quickly. There's several reasons why this is the case. There's sciencey type reasons, and then there's just environmental type reasons. But it's a pretty usual situation where the light falls off very quickly. So you get your subject, but then not very much else gets lit up. Also, and this is going to be a problem if you have people in your family who are older, because light from the flash, not so much from an LED, but from a flash, tends to be very bright for just an instant, but it tends to highlight redness in the skin, blemishes, and so forth. And I've taken some, again, was my model, and you're going to see that it just is not very flattering. Redeye is something that you'll get on flash too, and we'll give you some examples of that. This is a camera. It's got the pop-up flash. Now, I want to show you notice something. I'll come back when we start talking about Redeye later. Notice how close the flash is to the lens. In other words, the axis of the lens runs this way. Notice how close that pop-up flash is to the lens. If you've got any camera where the flash, I'm talking about flash now, not LED, but the flash is built into the camera, it's almost by definition going to be way too close to the axis of the lens. And you'll see how that causes red eye later on. This is a picture that I took of myself. Camera was mounted on a tripod. I used a remote. And as you can see, not particularly flattering, okay? Very flat light, all right? It just was not very good, okay? Now, sometimes flash can be great, and it depends again on the environmental situation. This is again another picture of my wife. By the way, you'll see a lot of pictures of me and my wife. I was going to take a whole lot of pictures for this seminar at Thanksgiving, but it turned out, and we were going to have a family get together that was going to be right up against Governor Pritzker's guidelines. And, but what happened was one niece and an uncle both came into contact with people who had come into contact with people who had the disease. And so we just decided to call, and it turned out, so we didn't really have any Thanksgiving, except my wife makes a really good pork tenderloin. Anyway, so, but flash can look good, particularly if it's combined with a light. Our kitchen was this is at a previous house, but our kitchen was very bright. And so the flash kind of illuminated her, but it helped with the light, but a lot of the light was simply coming from the rest of the regular room illumination. That worked out. With LEDs on phones, you have the same problem as flash, some of the same problems as flash, really ugly light. And you've also got the problem of there's not a lot of light coming out of that single LED. Another problem is that the light tends to be bluer. It just tends to be kind of off, okay? This is what I'm talking about here. This is from a cell phone using the LED on the cell phone. As you can see, not terribly attractive. Again, same problem, very flat light. And so it's like, you know, it's, if you got to, you got to, but man, try something else. Now, one of the things you can do is use a separate flash. Now, these are typically called in the industry shoe mount flashes. If you have a camera, particularly a single lens reflex type camera, you have a shoe for mounting a flash. These aren't that expensive anymore. Now, if you buy a Nikon flash or a Canon flash, you're spending $300, $400, $500. But you can buy off-brand flashes for less than $100 that'll work and are compatible with your camera. So if you're interested in that, you can start off very cheaply. They can also, a separate flash can be used off camera, which you'll see, and also can be bounced, okay? And another option is LED panels, which are a relatively recent technology. I actually bought two to use in the seminar. I'm using them now because they are providing the light for me. I've got one on each side of me, and I'll turn one off so you can see the effect it has. As you can see, if I turn the other one off, it would be pretty dark. But these LED panels throw a respectable amount of light. And so, and these are set at the lowest power setting. When I had them at the high power setting, I was getting washed out. So this is an on-camera shoe mount flash. Notice it's mounted on the shoe. Also notice that we've now improved or increased the distance from the flash head to the lens, which is a good thing. It eliminates or helps to eliminate red eye. So again, this is another picture, not that much better. There's a little bit more shadow because underneath my chin, there's a little bit, you can see that the flash head is mounted a little bit higher. So you get a tiny little bit more interest, but frankly, not enough to care about. Now, if you use a diffuser, and these can range from just a piece of fabric to a white garbage bag to and this thing actually fits onto a shoe mount flash. But this is a foot in diameter, but this is a picture with that diffuser. As you can see now, if we back up, it's softer light, all right? And so it's definitely an improvement. This, by the way, is the LED panels that I use. I bought 2 of them. They're $30 a piece. And when I used them for the demo for this program, I only used 1 of them. So I bought 2 because I figured that I would be using them in the way I would be using them here. So an LED panel, if I use that on the camera, and they have a mounting device so you can slide it into the shoe mount on your camera, kind of looks a little bit like that diffuser because the panels are bigger. The bigger the light source, the more diffuse and nice looking the light looks. Now we're going to try and really improve our pictures, and that's using a bounce flash. Notice that I can make the head bounce or be at an angle, not just straight ahead, but at an angle so that you're bouncing the light off of the ceiling. You've got a nice white ceiling, so let's use it. Now, it looks not bad, except for this big white area at the top of my forehead. I'm not sure why that's the case, but it's now becoming a little bit more pleasant. And you'll see in a lot of pictures that I take in the next few slides, these were all shot with a bounce flash. In fact, when I'm shooting at Christmas time or anytime the family gets together and I'm the designated photographer, I'm always using a bounce flash. The light is more natural. Okay, this is a much more pleasant picture than the previous one. This is my nephew. He's now in high school, but I was using a bounce flash because the bounce flash, you don't have to set up anything. You've got your camera, you've got the bounce flash set up. You just point and shoot. And if you've got it set to automatic, which you can do, then it's calculating the exposure for you, and you're getting reasonably nice pictures without much fuss. So frankly, getting a separate shoe mount flash just to use as a bounce flash is worth it right there if you want really an improvement in your holiday pictures. Again, these are more candids from a family get together at Christmas time. This picture illustrates a problem. No, it's kind of confusing. You don't really know what's going on here unless you look at it for a second. Plus, you've got what I call intruders. These are knees from other people sitting on the couch, elbows, and so forth. And so when I took the picture, I recognized that that was an issue. So I took another picture where I zoomed in. And so now you see what's going on, dog being introduced to the baby. And so kind of very cute picture, except for the fact that I don't like what's in the background. Okay, now this is just me. This may be more than any of you want to try, but it's kind of fun to do. And I don't like those light switches, and I don't like that candy dish, and there's something around his hand that it's a her. I don't like I don't like that, so I fixed it. So you can do that in PowerPoint. Took me about, not PowerPoint, in Photoshop took me about half an hour. A little bit more experience in Photoshop, but I'm not that experienced in Photoshop. But Photoshop makes it relatively easy to remove those kinds of things. More candid shots. One of the interesting things about using a flash is that you can sometimes decode how it worked in the eyes of the person that you took the picture of. For example, you can tell there's the flash, that highlight right there is the bulb, is the flash on the camera going off, because when it's bouncing, you're still going to see a little bit of light from the flash head actually hitting the face. But notice that a lot of light is bouncing off of the ceiling there. So it's kind of an interesting effect, is that you can sometimes decode what the lighting arrangements were from the eyes of the people being photographed. You can also get completely nuts because you can not only bend these flash heads up, you can angle them at the wall. Now you got to be careful you don't have some weird colored wall like yellow or red or something like that, because the light will pick up that color. But in this case, now this looks pretty good. Now this requires planning, because in most families' homes, you've got things hanging on the wall that kind of interfere with the whole bounce off the wall scenario. But bouncing a flash gives you that nice soft light coming from the ceiling or from the wall. Coming from the wall, you get a portrait that looks a little bit more interesting because you've got shadows and you've got a dark side, you've got a light side, and so forth. You can even move cameras like this off the camera and use various methods to trigger the flash when it's not actually attached to the camera. And so in this case, I put a light stand up, a physical light stand, which aren't very expensive either. And I set the flash on the light stand, but you'll notice we're back to that really hard, harsh light. But then I put that diffuser on it, and it looks not bad, okay? And then you can also have, you can save the money on the light stand by buying, or by having, you can't buy these. These are what I call voice activated, it's not, I don't call it that. Everybody calls it that. These are called voice activated light stands. And in this case, it's my wife's arm. And so my wife is my voice activated light stand, but it could be anybody. The training is on this is minimal, okay? They just have to hold the light and you can trigger the light from your camera. Again, there's technology involved in doing that, but if you bought the flash, you're 95% of the way there. So voice activated light stands don't cost anything, maybe a few cookies. And this is using the LED panel off of the camera on a light stand as well. All right, as you can see, softer light because it's a bigger screen, but it's very similar to the kind of flash you get for the light you get from a diffuser. Now, this is using the LED panel off of the camera for a cell phone, okay? And as you can see, you got, you know, the color is the problem. It's looking nice. The diffuser is working fine. It's just that it's got that blue tint to it. So I fixed that. So I just went into Lightroom, which is part of the Photoshop family, and just adjusted the color, and it came out a little bit, warmed it up a little bit, got rid of the blues. Now, I've been talking about flash, but beware the flash. Notice how it's not been very flattering to my wife's face, in addition to which it doesn't do much for the tree. It's drowned out the lights on the tree. Flashes can be bad, okay? One of the problems with using flashes is, again, as I said, there's a variety of reasons for it, but light fall off is a big problem. It depends on what you want. It can be something helpful in certain cases. But you'll notice that particularly when you're photographing people, is that luckily these two are right next to each other. So I photographed them. The flash illuminated both of them equally. You'll notice that because it's a flash, it is really kind of not doing it. This was not a diffused flash. This was just an on-camera flash. So it's not being very friendly to his face. Her face, not so bad because she's wearing makeup, but guys don't typically wear makeup. And so skin imperfections, a little extra red in the cheeks and so forth will show up. Took the same picture, a few minutes later, just for the heck of it, without the flash. And now I had to finagle with it in post-processing to make it look realistically okay, because when I first took it, it didn't look very good, but I played with the noise. But the key thing is you don't have that light fall off. Now you can see all the way back into the restaurant. It's evenly illuminated. It looks more natural. So this is just using the light in the restaurant. And again, with today's technology, available light that's inside wherever you're shooting may be sufficient to give you a nice picture. Again, another problem with flash, my wife and my niece were nicely lit. Me and my nephew, not so nicely lit, and the light just keeps falling off as you get further and further back into the restaurant. My dad lit pretty good. His wife, not lit as well, as you can see. Clearly, if you're going to use a flash with people, all right, make sure they're both equally distant from you, or just go with available light in your house, depending on how much light you have. And let's talk about red eye. Red eye occurs, and most people probably know this by now, but red eye occurs when your pupils are too big because you're in a dark room. When you're in darkness, your pupils get big, and when you're outside, your pupils get small. When your pupils get big and you use a flash, which is kind of surprising your eyes, okay? Your pupils are still open too wide, okay? And the light from the flash, because it's so close to the lens, actually lights up your retina, the interior of your eye, and that's why you get red eye. It's the blood from the interior of your eye that's being reflected out through the pupil. The solution to red eye, don't use a flash, use available light, okay? Or use off-camera light, or at least get your flash head higher using one of those Schumann flashes. In addition, most flashes these days have what's called a pre-flash. In other words, when you push the button on the camera, the flash will flash twice. The first flash simply tries to get the pupils to close down. It says, hey, and so the pupils will react after the flash, unfortunately, but in time for the second flash, which actually takes the picture. This is an example of the most amazing case of red eye I have ever seen. This is at a wedding, dark room, and my cousin's wife he's got it too, but she had just the most monstrous case of red eye I've ever seen. Possibly she was an alien, I don't know for sure. But in any case, there's technology. If you still have red eye, even with all the stuff we've talked about, just about every package, software processing, photo processing package has got a red eye tool, which allows you to eliminate the red eye. So it's not a big deal, but it certainly requires some work. And if you can use, and you won't have this problem if you do available light photography, because your pupil is already used to the light in the room. So all you're doing is taking pictures. You're not actually throwing in any additional light into the equation. Take pictures of the backgrounds, take pictures of the decorations, use them as backgrounds, as a source of light, as we've talked about, as an element in the picture to give you some context. It's Christmas, so you've got to get Christmas decorations in. Remember, you got to balance for making the light on the decorations look good, okay? So using available light usually helps in this regard, but if you're going to use flash, try to make sure you underexpose a little bit. This is an example, family picture, and I used flash, and you'll notice that the tree is kind of washed out. There's not really, I mean, you can see the lights, but the tree itself is just not very attractive. So again, using post-processing, using Photoshop and Lightroom, I just darkened the tree. So I can fix it after the fact. Now I also darkened my family as well, but you can do a lot in post-processing, but you may not want to get involved with that, and that's fine. And so, but I fixed it just to show you how you want to try to get this kind of look as opposed to that kind of look. Now, they also provide context. This would be this. We have this was in our family room, and I This would be this would be just a picture of me sitting on top of her horse, except for the fact that we had Christmas decorations. But I processed a little bit and frankly improved the picture. But I also, if you'll notice, I made the fire in the fireplace a little bit more obvious. This can be a problem with using available light. As I mentioned before, this particular room in our house has canister lights, which are bright. There's a lot of them, but these, in this case, I had set people up and they were sitting in a wrong place. And I didn't think about this at the time, is that the canisters throw so much light that if they're not sitting underneath the canister, they were actually sitting a little bit ahead of the canister as relating to me. So the shadows were falling in weird situations. So shadows can be a problem even with available light too. This was taken with flash. My dad's wife was very into nutcrackers. And so at some point in time, we inherited just a ton of nutcrackers. Apparently her kids didn't want them. I don't know why. Anyway, so I took a picture, flash. But remember, if you're going to use flash, beware of overexposing. You want those colors to come out. And so underexposing a little bit will help. This was an interesting project. This was the nativity scene that my folks had as long as I can remember. And I'm in my late 60s, so that was a long time ago. And last year, I decided to try to photograph it. And so I used the flash to light up the scene. I put a piece of what we call gel, but this is basically a flat piece of plastic cellophane type material. Put a piece of blue plastic over the lens head to make the scene blue, to kind of give you the feeling of nighttime. But then I went and bought, and I buy a lot of stupid stuff. Most of it's relatively inexpensive. But I bought because I wanted to light out, I wanted yellow light from like a lantern here to be cast on the family. So I bought a gooseneck light, wrapped some yellow cellophane around it, and ran it up inside this column, and basically it shined on the family. So I think it came out pretty well. I was very happy with it. And so now I have a gooseneck flashlight. So if anybody wants one, let me know and I'll send it to you. Now I apologize if this joke does not go over very well. I have a project. And in this case, this takes advantage of the fact that flash doesn't go very far. It falls off real quick. The lights in the background are the tree. Notice you don't see the tree. All you're seeing is the lights, because I constructed this scene so that the flash illuminated just the globe and the bag of peas that was sitting on top of the globe. And I knew that the flash would fall off really fast. And I positioned the globe so it was far enough from the tree that the light really wouldn't get to it. And so the title of this globe is Peas on Earth. I'll move on. More tips for you. First of all, pay attention to intruders. These are unwanted elements in your picture. The classic something coming out of the top of somebody's head. You can avoid these by paying attention to your backgrounds and making sure that you don't have cluttered backgrounds. Cluttered backgrounds are going to be a formula for intruders of some sort. And so try to eliminate your intruders ahead of time. So now we did this intentionally because I was teaching a class and I wanted to illustrate this, and my friend stood there in front of a lamppost and let himself be photographed. Good sport. Also avoid helicoptering when you are photographing kids, because we tend to stand at our level when we're photographing kids, and particularly if we don't have a camera that has a flip up screen or anything like that. So try to get down low where the kids are, or in this case, he was in a treehouse, so I was actually below him. So avoid helicoptering. Pay attention to being at the same level as the kids you're photographing. As I said, pay attention to your background. Try to keep it uncluttered so you avoid intruders. Also keep people away from the background. Because if they're too close to the background, particularly if you're using a flash, then the shadow from the flash is going to be cast right on the background, because she was like a couple inches away from the background. She was upset because I was interfering and holding her back from enjoying her piece of Portillo's chocolate cake. And so she was somewhat miffed, but it illustrates the point of get your subject, when you're using a flash, away from the wall. Pay attention to windows and mirrors. Okay, now I've done this 2 years in a row, and now I know better, but I should have just drawn the curtains and it would have been fine. But I didn't. And so while it's a relatively okay picture of the family, nobody blinked and so forth, it's ruined by the flash, because I was standing opposite them. The window was in back of them. It just reflected, and I didn't notice it until later when I was looking at the pictures. Now, when you're talking about group shots, I will point out this one. I didn't take this. This was taken in the mid-40s, long before my time. But this is an old vintage family picture. But I have never seen a better group family shot. Whoever made this photograph was brilliant. The picture, the composition is wonderful. It was my grandfather's birthday. This is my grandfather. And this, by the way, is my mother. And the light was coming from the left outside of the picture, obviously. You can tell because the shadows are falling. His shadow, for example, is falling over here and so forth. I'm guessing it was because they didn't have flashes back in those days. So at least they didn't have electronic flashes. So I'm guessing it was either a big flash with a bulb, like a flash bulb, or it might even have been a continuous light, like a movie light or something like that. But either way, this is just an amazing picture. Nobody's blinking. My Uncle Al never smiles in any picture. But everybody else is smiling, or at least looking pleasant. This is another picture, was taken a few years later. My dad is in this picture. That's him, looking extremely dorky. And my Uncle Al, again, never smiling. And then for some reason, Morris is looking off to the left. And I'm guessing that the photographer obviously didn't realize it, because they didn't have digital back in those days. And so when he lifted that negative out of the developing chemical, he looked at it and he probably said, oh, dang. So in any case, this, by the way, was taken with an on-camera flash. You can tell, again, by either the existence of the shadows or where the shadows are. Notice there's virtually no shadows behind these two guys, but there's a shadow over behind Al or Morris. And so this was taken probably by a different photographer who just didn't have the tools that he could have used. Posing, if you're going to pose them, either give them very specific instructions and show them, or just say, hey, do what you want with them, and then say, and maybe give them a theme or something. For example, I lead photo walks, and you're certainly welcome once April comes around. I lead photo walks at Cantini every month from April through October. And I always take a picture of the group as a head count, and also to illustrate some points about photographing people while we're doing it. And this was in August, I think. And Cantini's rules about face masks were, if you're 6 feet apart, you don't have to worry about a face mask, which is what the rules were back in those days. I'm not even sure what they are now. But in any case, so they didn't have their face masks on. And I said, because I had made sure that they were distanced. And I said, okay, now album cover. And this was the look I got, and it looked very nice. However, these three are in the shade pretty much, but this person has a little bit too much sunlight coming through, so it threw some shadows, which I don't like. But in general, it's a pretty good picture. Don't take one shot, take lots of pictures. Remember, folks, film is free. Electrons are the ultimate recyclable. So take lots of pictures, all right? I'm going to talk about one method in a second, but one that I'm not going to show you here, but is that if you are shooting with a camera that has the ability of firing off a lot of pictures in succession and you're shooting in a low light situation where your shutter speed is going to be kind of slow, then if you shoot a lot of pictures, most of them will be blurry, but the odds are that one of them will actually be where you were holding the camera still enough that you get a nice sharp picture. I've done that many times and it works. So keep that in mind. Now, there's a technology that's becoming more and more available on newer cameras, and that is called an intervalometer, okay? And I'm sure I've mispronounced it. I've never actually heard anybody say it. I think I did once, and I think he mispronounced it too. I read about it all the time, but I don't think I've ever actually seen it pronounced. But in any case, an intervalometer is where you can set your camera to just take pictures one after another. For example, I set the camera up this morning to take pictures every 2 seconds, 50 at a time. And I just pushed the button. And again, my wife had no interest in posing for me this year. And so I grabbed the cat, Ansel. Yes, the cat's name is Ansel, my favorite photographer. And so we have a picture of me trying to get Ansel into his cat tree. So that's the nice thing about taking all these pictures. I wound up taking like 250 pictures, something like that. I only used 7. I threw the others away. Electrons just vanished into the universe. This one was about the closest I got to what I was looking for, but Ansel wasn't looking at the camera. I can't really see what he's doing there, but he wasn't very helpful. This was where he was watching me go to the camera, set it up for the next batch and come back. And this is where he's actually looking at the camera, but my finger is blocking his way. Oh, I know what the problem was here. I was blinking. And so that doesn't help. So again, the benefit of taking group shots when you set up an intervalometer is you just say to people, okay, hold it, you push the button, it starts taking pictures, you walk into the frame, you joke around, make people feel comfortable. It's not that excruciating group photography experience because the camera is just taking pictures. If it's quiet, they may not even realize that it's taken, how many pictures it's taken. You throw away the pictures of you walking up to the group, you keep the pictures, you throw away the pictures where somebody's blinking. If you take a lot of pictures, you'll get at least one picture, or nobody is blinking and they're all looking at the camera. And it is a wonderful tool. So it's actually designed more for taking time exposure, night shots and so forth, or time lapse photography, that kind of thing. But for just shooting group shots, this is a gift from the photographic gods, is being able to use an intervalometer like this. Now, these are the 6 shots that I didn't want to use. This is a picture of Ansel using playing with the dealy bopper, my hat. This was the one that I liked. And so Ansel's a very affectionate cat with Kate and me. However, when we take Ansel to the vet, they have this cute little muzzle they put on Ansel because he is not a very pleasant cat to anybody but Kate and me. So also don't be that guy. Take time at your Christmas celebrations to chill out, not use your camera, or at least use your cell phone camera. Don't use your big, expensive, obnoxious camera. Just relax and enjoy the family, enjoy the holidays and so forth. Everybody else is going to be taking pictures with cell phone cameras. Now you're hopefully a little smarter about this, so you'll be taking pictures too, but so everybody will be taking pictures, but you're just part of the crowd there and you're not being that guy. Now we've got a couple minutes. I'm going to talk about model trains real quickly. This is the problem with photographing model trains. And some of you are going to have model trains running around the tree or someplace tonight, someplace around Christmas time. This is the problem with photographing model trains is because you're at such a short distance to the subject, you wind up with things out of focus. It's an optical thing. It's science. You can't get around it, except using what's called photo stacking. Photos, and by doing this, in other words, what I was able to do is take about 20 pictures, and I moved the focus point back along the train. I'm pointing at it with my finger. Along the train, and then I focused on the car, and then this car, and that car, and so forth. 20 pictures, but I wound up with that where everything is in focus, which you just can't do with one shot. All right. Ditto for this one, another similar view. The engine is in focus, but as you get further back, nothing is in focus. Photo stacking again, and you have this. Now, photo stacking is available. There are third-party software packages out there that will do it. Photoshop and the latest versions will do it as well. It's wonderful. I've used it for trains. I've used it for flowers. I've used it for still lifes. You need a tripod. You need software to do the stacking. You need a camera that you can adjust the focus manually, and you need patience. But with that, with those things, you can do photo stacking and take some really interesting pictures of trains or anything else. And that concludes this presentation. We've talked about the types of different light, outside light, inside light, window light. We've talked about photographing people, group shots, photographing decorations and trees and things, and even a little bonus information on model trains. Now, this gentleman is the fellow who plays Santa Claus every year except this year, unfortunately, at Cantini. If you ever have a chance to go to Cantini for their brunch with Santa, he is the best Santa Claus in the world. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to you all. I'll turn it back over to you, Barry.
Great, thank you so much. We don't have any questions yet, but we want, of course, allow people a few minutes to process all of this wonderful information and think about questions. I'm wondering, Jim, on my camera, in addition to the photo, some type of control where it will take several pictures at once, it also takes bracketed pictures where it will take a couple of different exposures. Do you also recommend that?
I don't actually do bracketing myself. And so I don't have, it's not something that automatically springs to mind. Usually, and that's one of the wonderful things about digital is you see the picture on the back of the camera. And so I don't take pictures. Bracketing is something that you probably would find more useful if you're shooting fast moving objects like sports and so forth, where you don't have time to look and see if you got the right exposure. The kinds of things I tend to photograph, I have time to look in the back of the camera, make sure the exposure is right. And if it's not right, then I can make a couple of adjustments to take another picture. But if you're shooting situations where, say, for example, kids are playing, bracketing might be a good way. But again, keep in mind, if you're shooting inside, which is what a lot of your people pictures are going to be during Christmas time, because it gets dark at 4 o'clock, and so you're not going to be outside that much. Bracketing is not that helpful because the light is going to stay the same. And so the exposure is going to be the exposure. So once you've got the exposure locked in, you really don't have to worry about that anymore. But outside, yeah, bracketing might be more important because if the kids are running around and playing and so forth, then they using bracketing might allow you to get better exposures. And you can, in some cameras, you can expose, up to, you can make 9 different pictures very quickly, where it's like 4 exposures under, 4 exposures over, and then 1 and right in the middle. And so, but again, it's not something that I do very much just because it's not the kind of subjects that I typically photograph.
Sure. Thank you. Someone's asking, Jim, is a hot shoe flash a universal fit? So for instance, would it work on both an old film camera and an SLR? I think that's the question.
Yeah, I think they, I shouldn't say that, but I know that they seem to be somewhat standardized. When I look at, I was looking at generic flashes just to see what the prices were. I've got enough investment in flashes, I don't need anymore, but looking to see what the prices were. And the prices, for generic third-party off-brand flash is like 79, 80 bucks, something like that. And so, and they looked like they listed the cameras they worked with, and it was across all brands, all kinds of stuff. So I'm guessing that, let's put it this way, it might not be a bad idea to try it, but you're talking electronics and you might short circuit something. So you might want to be careful about that. But on the other hand, they seem to be pretty generic. Now, I would not take my Nikon flash and try to put it on a Canon camera, but the third-party flashes seem to be pretty generic. And I don't think you might, I would guess that putting a Canon flash on a Canon camera, an old Canon flash on a Canon camera, you're probably going to be safe because there's just not really that much technology built into the flash interface. It's just basically triggering the flash to go off. So there's probably not that much to it. I would hate to have somebody's camera ruined because they used a flash that was off brand, but so be careful. But I know that the third-party flashes seem to be pretty generically set up.
Great, great, thank you. And another question, is bracketing the same as high dynamic range?
Sort of. You would actually use this to create high dynamic range pictures, which sometimes you can now create in camera. But basically the way bracketing works is at the very simplest, you would shoot 3 pictures. You'd shoot one picture that was your camera figured out, said, hey, this is the right exposure. And then you shoot another where you underexpose by, say, 1 stop. And then you bracket where you overexposing by 1 stop. And that's the traditional method of bracketing. And hopefully one of those pictures will work out to be properly exposed. Then they went to 5 pictures where you're shooting 2 underexposed, 1 stop and 2 stops, and then two more that are 1 stop over and 1 stop and 2 stops over, plus the one in the middle. That's 5. And then we get to 7 and then 9. And so, is that right? Yeah. And so you can get nuts with this. And so, but if you're shooting 9, you're going from practically all dark to practically all white out. And that's where you can start making some interesting high dynamic range pictures where you merge all those different exposures together into one picture that where you don't lose a lot of detail in the highlights and you don't lose much detail in the darks. And I have done that, but again, usually when I do that, I just do it manually. I just underexpose a few shots and overexpose a few shots. But if you do it automatically, that's fine. But I'm just, because I don't use that technology that much, I just do it manually and it works the same way. Again, what I tend to shoot doesn't move around a lot, so no big deal.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much, Jim. We certainly want to express our appreciation for all the time and effort that went into this presentation. I will be sending links to contact Jim and view examples of his work following tonight's program. If you are watching the recording of this presentation, you may request those links by emailing me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE like as in community engagement. The recording of this program will be available on the library's YouTube page in about a week. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, thank you so much, Jim. This has been wonderful information. Everyone take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.